begin this morning. What a blessing to see everybody, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to teach, and we're thankful that Blanche is home and she seems to be doing okay. Yeah. And got her blood pressure all straightened out.
Yeah, for now.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, you live long enough, you get a lot wrong with you. That's
Oh,
it.
yeah.
That's all the old folks are going, yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And John, what's the doc telling you, buddy? Have you?
I go for some more tests on Tuesday.
Tuesday, all right. Well, we want to be mindful of all those who are undergoing evaluation and so forth. And for our visitors, we're very thankful that you're here. And Mike, would you word a prayer for us this morning?
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day you've given us and this opportunity to come together and study your word. We ask for your guidance for all the teachers and such that are teaching us this morning, that they have a good knowledge of your word and we have a good listening heart to understand it. We thank you for all you've given us, and especially for your son, and him dying for us is unimaginable. Again, we thank you, and in his name we pray.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for the good prayers. I appreciate, Linda, you coming back today after I gave you such a hard time last time. Do y'all remember last week? I asked the doctor, I said, do you read? Yeah, I read. If y'all wouldn't mind, be turning to Genesis chapter 7. Genesis chapter 7. And we will use that for the beginning verses in just a moment. You know, one of the keys, one of the secrets to being a good student, and hopefully we're all lifelong learners, is realizing that you don't know sometimes as much as you need to know. And that keeps you growing. Would y'all agree with that? Have you ever had a time in your life on some subject where you thought you knew all that you needed to know, and then you found out you were completely wrong on it? And can you think of examples like that? You know, if you're honest with self, you can. I was thinking, and I won't bore you with all the details, but years ago, I was involved in a fish farming program. And we were being evaluated on the fish gaining weight. You know, catfish, and you plop you. And so I got the idea, because I knew that cottonseed meal is high protein, and fish like it. And I would feed them cottonseed meal because it was inexpensive, high protein, put a lot of weight on, get an A, here we go, all right? And I started feeding them cottonseed meal, and the fish started losing weight. And some of them started to die, all right? I thought, man, I'm feeding them this great food. They're supposed to put on weight. Everybody does it. What's the deal? And so I finally got hold of an old fish farmer, and he said, oh, is it degossipalized cottonseed meal? I said, come again. And he said, degossipalized. I said, what is that? And he said, well, cottonseed meal has little hairs on it, and those are called gossiples, and fish can't digest it when it has that little hair, so you have to buy degossipalized cottonseed meal to feed the fish. I didn't know. Now, I mean, I had never heard it, wasn't on the radar screen, I didn't know. And that taught me a lesson, that sometimes you think you know as much as you need to know. And then it turns, you know, it's like the old joke, how do you pronounce the capital of Kentucky? Is it Louisville or Louisville? The answer is neither. It's Frankfurt, okay? Right, Jenny? So sometimes we think we know what and that's important. When you're learning a subject, for example, on radiometric dating, that subject was so new to me. You know, I'd heard the same kind of lessons that I guess we've all heard growing up if you've been a member of the church for a while. It turned out there's just a lot I didn't know about it, you know, and I'm still learning, and that's part of being a good student, is realizing what you don't know and growing and learning. And if you ever get to the point where you go, well, nobody can ever teach me anything or show me anything, now you're in trouble. Now you're in a lot of trouble. We are halfway through our series, and for the second half of it, we're going to be concentrating on Noah's Ark, the global flood, the Tower of Babel, and the Ice Age. Now, if you're like I am, I guess I'd always studied Noah's Ark and the flood and the Tower of Babel. The Ice Age was completely new to me, so maybe that'll be new information for you as well. But I want us to read a little bit this morning on Genesis chapter 7, verses 1 through 12. And let's see who would be willing to read for me. Jason, do you feel up to read today, buddy?
Sure.
Okay, so Genesis 7, 1 through 12, and I'll probably stop you along the way there.
Then the Lord said to Noah, enter the ark, you and all your household. For you alone I have seen to be righteous before me in this time. You shall take with you every clean animal by sevens, a male and his female, and of the animals that are not clean, two, a male and his female.
Okay, I have a question for y'all, and it's a little bit of a trick question. When it says 7 clean animals, a total of 7 or 7 males and 7 females?
It appears to me it's
Six,
fair.
seven pairs. It's 7 pairs.
I think I have always assumed, and I think I'm right, that it's 7 pairs, because later on you'll read about them going into the ark 2 by 2. But just so y'all know, that's one of the questions that Bible scholars like to debate. And it will depend a little bit on which translation you came with you this morning. And so depending on what version you happen to be reading, you may tend to think 14 total, 7 male and 7 female, or a total of 7. But in my own mind, I'm thinking, no, you want a pair, you know, at least in my mind, that's the way I'm thinking about it. And I guess I always assume that. But just so y'all know, that is a big debating point among Bible scholars. Just something for you to be aware of. Go ahead. Oh, yeah, Larry, go ahead, buddy.
This might give away my stupidity, but what is a clean animal?
Oh, okay, no, that's an
What's that
excellent
referring
question.
to?
So that has to do with Jewish dietary rules, and of course this is before the Jewish kingdom. But if you think about it, there were certain animals that people were allowed to eat, and some that were considered unclean, that they weren't allowed to eat. So if you're talking about fish, for example, what were considered the clean fish?
Fins and scales.
Okay, had to have fins and scales, and so what would be an example of an unclean fish? Yeah, catfish.
Catfish.
Yeah, catfish would be, whereas, shark, there you go, or a porpoise, you know, that'd be so, the unclean animals, and then if you're thinking about mammals, what would be an example of an unclean mammal? Pigs, that's exactly right. So, that's the clean and the unclean. So there were certain dietary restrictions that God had given his people, all right? Which evidently he had communicated to them. All right, go ahead, Jason.
Also of the birds of the sky by sevens, male and female, to keep offspring alive on the face of the earth. For after 7 more days, I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And I will blot out from the face of the land every living thing that I have made.
Now, just reading that part, does that sound like a local flood or a global flood? I mean, that sounds global, doesn't it? And the rest of the reading is going to emphasize that in my mind. And again, the reason I'm bringing that up is you need to be aware that there are a lot of folks who believe that the flood in Noah's day was a local flood. And I'm thinking, why build an ark? Just tell them to, go over there, But anyway, just so you're aware, a lot of folks take the position that it's not a global flood, but I don't think that's consistent with the reading that we have here. Go ahead.
And Noah did according to all that God had commanded him. Now Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came upon the earth. Then Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him entered the ark because of the water of the flood. Of clean animals and animals that are not clean, and birds and everything that creeps on the ground, there went into the ark to Noah by twos, male and female, as God had commanded Noah.
See, doesn't that sound like pairs? Although, I mean, consistently I'm thinking 7 males, 7 females, and then if you're talking about the unclean 2, male and a female, that's at least the way I understand it. Reading. Go ahead.
And it came about after the 7 days that the water of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day all the fountains of the deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. And the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights.
All right. You think about flooding. I'm sure that we cannot begin to imagine the destruction and the effects of Noah's flood. I mean, you like to think about it, you like to let your mind play with it, but I'm sure it's beyond our imagination. A couple of weeks ago, Rob and I drove up through Kerrville just to kind of see the effects of that local flood, and that's just one sort of medium-sized flood. But to see those huge cypress trees, like 4 of us couldn't get our arms around those cypress trees, just laid over, just the tremendous force of that. And again, that's just one little sort of local flood. And the loss of life, can y'all imagine what it would be like for the whole earth to be inundated with water? And we'll talk about this in more detail, but I believe that the earth was probably flatter back then. I don't think the mountains and so forth were as high, but to have them completely covered with water. And if you were to go ahead, Mike.
15 cubits.
Yeah, by a lot. And I'm thinking, at first it starts raining and you go, well, I'll get up to higher ground. And then you keep going up to higher ground, and then pretty soon there is no higher ground. And what would be the effects of that when you think about all of that life dying? And what would be, if you were looking for fossils, what would you see when you found a fossil bed if it was a worldwide flood? What kind of animals would you see mixed together? And they'd be all of them, right? So you'd have freshwater and saltwater beasts, and you'd have big animals and small animals, and you'd have all of those, and that's what you do see. Go ahead.
I mean, they found fossils from deep ocean on top of mountains.
Yes, that's exactly right. And so when you see that speaks to a global, worldwide flood. And I'm sure that it would be beyond our imagination. Would y'all agree with that statement? And again, I like to think about it. I like to try to imagine what that would be like, but I'm certain that it is beyond imagination. And so what verse did we end up with there?
12.
Okay, so we finished up with 12. And so the main rain, if I can say it that way, the main flooding was over 40 days. And again, remember that if you look back at Genesis 2, so if you look back at Genesis 2 and verse 6, people like to debate where it says a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the earth. Folks like to debate if the mist or the canopy of water, if that was true just at the very beginning of creation, or was that true up to the time of Noah? In other words, one of the debates folks like to have is, had it ever rained before Noah's flood, or is this simply describing what it was like at the very beginning of creation? And that's one of those debates. When I was growing up, I think we always thought about the canopy, the mist of water covering the earth. I'm not as certain about that anymore. The wording seems to be describing just the way it was at the beginning of creation. Leslie?
Think about Job, and he talked about the water cycle.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I don't know on timing on that.
Yeah, and we'll have more to say about Job. It's interesting to see how often ice is mentioned in Job. I think
Snow.
Job is one indication, I think, of the Ice Age, and we'll talk about that later on. All right? So good discussion so far, and just let your mind be playing with that, and we will have a lot more to say about Noah's flood later on. If you wouldn't mind, take a look at Hebrews 11 and verse 7 for just a moment. Hebrews 11 and verse 7. And let's see. Leslie, would you mind reading that one verse for me? Hebrews 11, verse 7, which talks about Noah.
By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning the events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith.
All right, so he becomes an example of faith in, as recorded in the New Testament. One of the marks of the inspiration of Scripture is that it is just as detailed in talking about the sins of its heroes and faults and weaknesses as it is in talking about their good points. So, like David was a man of great faith, and yet his sin with Bathsheba is told in great detail, just as much detail as his victory over Goliath. And I think about that in relationship to Noah. After the flood, what sin do we read about concerning Noah and one of his sons, Ham? Anybody recall that? So after the flood, go ahead, Ron. Yeah, so Noah gets drunk later on, and remember Ham sees him uncovered in his tent. We'll have some discussion about that. But that's a mark of inspiration. I can tell you when most people write biographies, what do they want to do? When they get to the bad part of a person's life, well, we won't talk about that very much, and we'll magnify the good parts. That's just human nature to do that. But the Bible doesn't do that. And the only way I can explain that is by the controlling hand of the Holy Spirit. You know, Holy Spirit, I'm going to tell you the good points, and I'm going to tell you the bad points. I'm going to do it in just as much detail. And so I think that really is a mark of inspiration. Okay, so far so good. So we're going to be talking, and let me say that today's class and next week, I think, are the most challenging technical classes that we're going to have. This is going to require the best that you have in you right now. I really like the way my graphic artist did that. Doesn't that look neat? We're talking about the rocks of ages or the rock of ages. And I want to talk a little bit more about radiometric dating. But before we do that, take a look at that first question since we read about Noah. What do y'all think are some of the most common questions that people have about Noah's Ark and the flood? What have people asked you? Or maybe what questions have you had before?
Where is the ark?
Okay, does the ark still exist? And I'll just tell you right now that every time they think they found evidence of the ark, it always turns out not to be there, all right? So I understand that there have been movies about it and all of that, but usually it turns out just to be a natural feature or something else. And so does the ark still exist? And I'm not saying they're not going to find it, but I'm just saying so far the evidence is not compelling. Yes?
What did all those animals do for a year on the ark?
Yeah, and how did they get all those animals on the ark? And what did they do with all the waste, and how did they feed them, and how did they water? And actually, I think that's probably the most common question. Actually, that's less of a problem than most folks realize. We'll talk about that in more detail. But that brings us to our vocabulary word for the day, Brahmanology. Without looking at your smartphone, does anybody know what Brahmanology means? Oh, good. It's good you came to class today. You learned a new word. Brahmanology is a new science that deals with the classification of animals according to Bible kinds. So it's a study of Bible kinds of animals. So like the cat kind, the dog kind, and so forth. And it's really, so this is it's a new new field of study, and it deals with how many different kinds of animals there are. And you know, when I was in school, y'all tell me if this is different than what y'all learned. I think I was always told that species of animals, you know, what makes a species is that they can't interbreed. That is hugely wrong. That is hugely wrong. I don't know why we were told that. John, would you agree with that?
I agree.
Okay. So John would certainly have the expertise in his area of veterinary knowledge that species of animals oftentimes can interbreed. So for example, John, can a coyote breed with a dog?
Yes.
Can a dog breed with a wolf? Can a wolf breed with a coyote? Yes, all right. Can a fox breed with a dog? No. But they're all members of the canine family, so there are certain limits. But just remember, if you were taught, if a preacher ever told you, preachers used to tell me this all the time, species can't interbreed with one another, completely wrong. Okay, completely wrong. And we'll have more to say about that. But Brahmanology is a new field of science that deals with trying to figure out how many Bible kinds would have had to be on the ark in order to populate the earth with the animals that we see now. Nothing more painful than a new thought, right? Any other common questions that people have about the ark?
How did you get all of those? How could the ark be big enough for all?
Oh, okay, yes, that's exactly right. So there's always like, did they have cages and did they have water, and how was ventilation handled on the ark? You know, Julie?
And the scripture we just read said he did it in 7 days.
Yeah, okay. And how long did it take to build the ark? All right, there's one. There's a good one. We'll have more to say about that. So I just want your mind to be thinking about that a little bit while we talk about radiometric dating. Okay, prepare to get a little bit technical here.
John, where did all the water go?
Yes, that's right. And that's exactly, where did it all come from and where did it all go? There's a good question. And we'll have a lot to say about that. Yes, David?
How is there fresh water and salt water
Yes.
after a flood?
Yes, the mixing of the water, right? Yeah, that is a good question. You know, there are a lot of fish species that can tolerate both fresh and salt water, but a lot can't too, right? We'll have more to say about that. Good questions all. Your brain's really working. I appreciate that. All right, here's something you probably haven't studied much about. I asked you to think about the different types of, since we're talking about radiometric dating, I want y'all to think about the different types of radiation. Alpha, beta, gamma, and then X-rays, all right? These are the main types of radiation. Does anybody know what alpha radiation is? I wouldn't expect you to know. I certainly didn't know. All right? Okay, alpha radiation is when atoms give off protons and neutrons. So alpha radiation is protons and neutrons being discharged from atoms. And the thing to know about it is it's easy to protect yourself from alpha radiation. A single layer of tinfoil will block alpha radiation, all right? So just a single layer will block it, all right? Gamma radiation is when electrons are given off, and that penetrates deeper, all right? That penetrates deeper. That's electrons being given off. And then gamma radiation is more like an intense sunburn. It's like electromagnetic waves. And brothers and sisters, that's what doctors use. That will penetrate gamma radiation. If you have cancer and you're getting radiation treatments, you're getting gamma radiation, and it will penetrate several feet of concrete or several inches of lead, and will go through all of the tissues in your body. And so, Robin, how long ago? 25 years, 23 years? Okay, 23 years ago when Robin had breast cancer, she got 37 radiation treatments, all right? And it was all gamma radiation, so it would penetrate into the tissue, and the tissue remained warm for 6 months to a year, all right? Think about that for a second. So here, just one layer of tinfoil will block it. Here, they don't use this for anything. It penetrates a medium amount. And here is what doctors use, gamma radiation. And X-rays are like gamma radiation, but at much lower energy level, all right, much lower energy. So you go to the dentist and maybe they put a lead apron on you or something like that. And so it's relatively easy to protect you from most X-rays. You know, they want to make sure they don't give you too much, but it's at much lower energy. And the reason why nuclear bombs are so destructive is because they give off all of those types of radiation, all right? So there's the immediate effect of nuclear bomb, and then there's the residual radiation over time, and nuclear bombs give off all of that. All right? And I want y'all to remember that everybody in here has some radiation in you. You all have carbon-14. You can't escape it. It's part of the food chain, and that's just part of being alive. There's no way to protect yourself from that. There's no way to get rid of all of that. All right? So just be aware of that. One last question. In 2 Peter 2 and verse 5, how is Noah described? What does it say about Noah? 2 Peter 2 and verse 5. Somebody just call it out.
And did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought
All right, so he's described as a preacher of righteousness. I'm thinking, boy, not much of a preacher. The only ones who listen to him are members of his own family. But I'm thinking, I bet he was glad that they did. I bet he was glad that they did. And what was the likely, now we're actually not told exactly how the people reacted, but I think the implication is they didn't listen very well. Would you agree with that? They didn't listen to the warnings because only a total of 8 people were saved. So 2 Peter 2:5 is a good verse because it talks about being a preacher of righteousness, and it reminds us that most warnings are not listened to. Most warnings are not listened to. That's sad. Okay, so let's talk a little bit this morning about radiometric dating in a little more detail. And remember what 2 Peter 3 and verse 4 says. When somebody comes along, they say, we've got all of this figured out. and everything rocking along smoothly, and we can tell exactly how old something is because it's always continued at the same rate. Anytime you hear that, know that that person is not speaking the truth, right? You're deceiving yourself if you believe that there's never been any eruptions or changes or Noah's flood didn't happen or anything like that. That uniformitarian thinking will certainly get you into trouble. And then also, and I have to remind myself of this, beware of any testing that presumes what it's supposed to prove. So imagine that I believe that the universe is 13.8 billion years old, or that the earth is 4 billion years old, and I start looking for results. Which results am I naturally going to latch on to? Which ones am I going to believe? The ones that confirm what I already think is true. And would y'all agree we all have a tendency to do that? If I think something is right, I tend to listen only to the evidence that supports what I already believe. And you just have to be aware of that. I mean, that's a natural human tendency, because then I ignore, right? I ignore any evidence to the contrary. May not pay attention to anything that contradicts what I already believe. If you, this morning, before you leave, it would be wonderful if you would take a look at the rocks up here, because one thing I want you to know is only igneous and some metamorphic rocks undergo radiometric dating. Sedimentary rock, because it's redeposited material, is presumed and contaminated. So granite, they would use granite for radiometric dating, but they would not use sandstone, a sedimentary rock. All right? So just bear that in mind. Only igneous and metamorphic rocks undergo radiometric dating.
John?
Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I thought radiometric dating was only good on material that had been living.
Okay, I'm glad that you bring that up. Radiometric is a broad term that means any kind of not just radiocarbon dating, but any kind of long dating, all right? So that's a good question. So carbon dating, carbon-14 dating, is only used for things that were once alive. I appreciate you bringing that up. So radiometric dating is just a broad term for any kind of radiometric dating, such as isotopes of uranium-238 into lead, is built on several assumptions. And here's where I want you to pay close attention. Right? Assumption number one, I'm assuming that the rate has remained steady throughout history, that it's never changed, and that no events or conditions have altered the rate of decay. And so radiometric dating is based on uniformitarian thinking. Y'all got that? That's very, very important. So I'm assuming that everything is run at the same rate. Do y'all remember my faulty sand timer? It ran for about 10 seconds and then stopped. I've never seen a sand timer do that before, all right? Ron said it's the perfect sand timer. John is making your point for you there. But do y'all think Noah's flood could have affected the chemical composition of rocks and material? Perhaps. I'm not sure, but perhaps. How about local floods? How about groundwater leaching? How about freezing and thawing? How about volcanic eruptions? Could those have affected the chemical compositions of different samples? And how would you know? How would you know? Point is, we don't know. I remember in our first class, Lynn Angel was sitting over there about where Kiernan is. He raised his hand and he said, or something you're not even thinking about, John. And I think that is a great point. There could be things that affected the rate of decay that aren't even on, like degospelized cottonseed meal, that aren't even on our radar screen right now. Okay? Do we think that history's always run smoothly and steadily? There have been no geologic or atmospheric disruptions. Mitch, I'm reminded you brought up a good point when you and I were talking the other day. You know, the Earth's magnetic field is getting weaker over time. It's measurable. The Earth's magnetic field is getting weaker over time. The magnetic field protects us from ultraviolet radiation. When the magnetic field was stronger long ago, less carbon-14 was being produced. Now that the magnetic field is weaker, more carbon-14 is being produced. And how long, Mitch, do you recall, did the scientists say that it would take before it reached equilibrium? Do you remember that?
30,000 years.
30,000 years, but it's not at equilibrium yet. There's more carbon-14 being produced now than is decaying. More is being produced than is decaying, which would tend to argue that the Earth is not 30,000 years old yet. All right? Do we think, all you need to remember is this, do we believe that history has always run smooth and that there have been no changes? Mike?
Do scientists take into account solar flares?
Yes.
You know.
There's less carbon-14 at the bottom of the ocean than there is on dry land. What if I get a sample from the bottom of the ocean and test it? Might it be different than one that I got from up on land? Absolutely. All right, we're gonna have some fun here in just a moment. But anyway, we got different rocks here. I've got marble, I've got coal, I've got sandstone, I've got conglomerate. And then to get to your point, Mitch, here are some things that theoretically could be tested with carbon-14. These are buffalo teeth. And the guy on eBay told me that they're from the 1700s in Sioux, and Sioux Indian 1700s. He may have picked them up out in the field last week for all I know. Right? But theoretically, we should maybe be able to test all of those teeth and find out. Now, teeth are not a real good example. We'll talk about that later on. But theoretically, you could test that for carbon-14. That's a big tooth. Yeah. Okay. And the same guy who told me that's from the 1700s told me that this is a Sioux bone necklace. Judging from the fact that I paid $5 for it, I doubt it. But it's made out of bone. And theoretically, we could test it and see carbon-14, whether or not it's made out of bone. Here is raw amber, tree sap, rosin, right? Since it was part of a tree, we should be able to test that and see, right? You're welcome to look at all of this later on, right? So, Reagan, you've been a good sport. Will you be a good sport, or you're going to be gone for 2 weeks after this, right? Okay, so I get you today, all right? And my man and Belle, this is what you're going to want to take pictures, okay? So, I want you to think about this for a second. I have a bowl of potatoes up here. And what I want you to do, Reagan, is we're going to time you. Does somebody have a stopwatch on their phone? And who's going to time this one?
I'll time.
This may be the only time you get to see this.
John, I'll time.
Okay, Dan. So I'm going to want you to peel that potato. And we're going to test you and see how long it takes to peel the potato.
The potato.
You know which end of the thing to hold here? Okay, all right. You're a good sport. Go ahead and start.
These potatoes were from the 1600s.
I don't think we're going to have any potato left, do you?
Faster.
Did a good job. He's a good friend.
How?
Did you put up with it?
How much?
You don't have to do it perfectly, but you know.
You don't want me to stall the class?
You got 5 minutes.
Got about 10 potatoes.
Good job, Ray. You're a good friend. Okay, thank you. That's good. How long, Daniel?
47.33 seconds.
All right, so let's round it off to 50 seconds, or you can go ahead and put that down, Ray. Thank you very much. You're a good friend.
I'm going to
You
John's
take this
for
easy.
lunch.
Yeah, that's lunch. Be careful with it. So if we said 50 seconds, and there are 10 potatoes in that bowl, theoretically, how long would it take him to peel those 10 potatoes? Okay, so we just multiply, 50 seconds by 10, right? And they say, okay, all right, so, we got that, John, but let me ask y'all, could a lot of things affect how long it took him to peel 10 potatoes?
Yes.
And what are some of the things that could affect Reagan's peeling?
Size of the potato.
Okay, first of all, the potatoes might be different sizes. That's exactly right. What else?
Dull blade.
Okay, his technique might get better or worse as he gets tired out, right? Okay.
I'm gonna be getting worse.
Oh, yeah. What else could affect it?
The blade.
The tool itself might become dull over time, right?
Density of your potato too.
Okay, each potato may have a little bit different composition. Some may be kind of rotten, some be kind of.
Russet and golden potatoes.
All right, okay, so different species of potatoes. Yes, Julie?
He might have to start shooing flies away.
Okay, exactly right. Or Bill might call him to go mow the grass, all right? The point I'm trying to make is, would y'all agree with me that there are dozens of factors that could potentially affect his rate of peeling the potato? And the point I'm trying to make is the same thing is true for the rate of decay. You don't know, and like Lynn Angel said, maybe something you're not even thinking of affects it. And if you're talking about thousands or potentially millions of years, that just compounds the problem even more. So whenever somebody says, I know how long it took Reagan to peel one potato, so I know how long it would take him to peel 10 potatoes or 100 potatoes or 1,000 potatoes, you're just deceiving yourself when you say that. Assumption number 2 is that so let's say uranium decays into lead. We're assuming that there's no lead to start with, right? Think about that for a second. But what if there was some lead to start with? So there was some uranium and there was some lead already. Would that affect your calculation? And in fact, I'm thinking that for most of man's history, lead has been much more useful than uranium. And so my guess is God probably put some lead in the rocks to start with. There's not a single person on the face of the earth that can tell you whether or not there was some of the daughter element present in the rocks to begin with. Think about that. Assumption number 3 is that if radiometric dating is accurate, then our results should be fairly consistent across time. So if I use this form of radiometric dating and it's accurate, it should give me about the same results as this form of radiometric dating on the same sample. If things are accurate, the results should be consistent, maybe a little bit of variation, but they should be consistent with one another. Right? So here are some examples. It's not true. There's rocks in Honolulu, Hawaii that formed in volcanic eruptions 200 years ago. In other words, we know how old the rocks are. The rocks are 200 years old. That's when they were formed. We know that. We have record of the eruption. And yet they date 160 million to 3 billion years old by the potassium-argon method. What does that tell you?
Not accurate.
It's not accurate. You can't. If your boss told you that he was going to give you $3 billion and instead he gave you $200, would you be happy about that? Would you think he was pretty close to being right?
No.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, one thing that helps lend you to what you're saying, the inconsistencies of what you're talking about, they're not even true with what they're saying, because even like in my job, I do what is called a product material identification. And we use, just like when a woman goes to get an ultrasound, we use sound waves to detect the density of metal piping. Okay? Each different type of metal, the sound wave goes through it different. So the velocity of the sound wave, when it hits carbon steel, will go a certain speed. Stainless steel, a different speed. Titanium, a different speed. Aluminum, a different speed. Nothing stays the same.
That's a good point. And it helps us illustrate what we're talking about, the inconsistent results that you may get. The same rock layer in the Grand Canyon, dated 0.01 to 17 million years old, which is a big difference, by the potassium-argon method. But then when it was tested by the rubidium-strontium method, it tested 1,270 to 1,390 million years old. Think about the difference between these numbers and these numbers using two different methods of radiometric dating. But what is that telling you? What is that? You know, if you just go down to HEB and you pick up a Nature magazine, it's going to sound like all of this is very settled science, that they figured all this out and it's all very settled science. If you start reading the articles that the scientists write to one another and see them questioning one another, you will get an entirely different picture, I'll guarantee you. Probably won't get through all of these. The same sample of granite, so that granite looks just like this granite, doesn't it? The same sample of granite yields an age of 1.5 billion years by the uranium-lead method and 6,000 years by the helium leakage method. 6,000 to 1.5 billion. Go ahead. Yes.
So why isn't there more argument in the science community about this stuff that folks like us hear about?
Yeah, that's a good question. You might want to try to take a stab at answering. So Johnny, you're giving us all these examples. Why haven't we heard about these examples before? And why does it sound like it's settled science when we read about it? Correct? What do you think, Christy? And then I'll get this.
I would say that if the government is subsidizing you with all kinds of grants in order to run all of your tests, and the government is already skewed one direction, then obviously if you want to keep being funded, you're going to skew your findings to a certain direction in order to...
And the reported dates then become actually selected dates.
Yeah.
All right? Jason?
I couldn't have said it better than Kristen.
All right, okay, all right. He said the same thing. All right, good deal. There should be no helium. Helium should have leaked out of the zircon crystals if the granite truly is 1.5 billion years old, and yet there's lots of helium in granite. What does that tell you? Granite probably isn't as old as 1.5 billion years. Dr. Kurt Sewell, electrical engineer for the Manhattan Project and pioneer in carbon-14 dating, says, the methods that give ancient ages all give about as many wrong answers as right ones. Of course, the public doesn't usually hear of these wrong answers, which, Mitch, is exactly what you just talked about. Think about that for just a second. Now, I know we're almost out of time, so let me tell you, and I've got a couple more slides I'm going to show you probably next week. So what we did in our first class is actually sent off some samples for carbon-14 dating. Because it's one thing to read what somebody else has done, and I thought, what if we could do some testing, all right? So we actually sent off some samples for carbon-14 dating, and next week, Lord willing, we'll take a look at some of those examples. So that's actual original dating that we have done. But I'll give you one last slide this morning. Assumption number 4, there should be no carbon-14 detected in organic samples that are older than 100,000 years. Remember, after 10 half-lives, there should be no detectable carbon-14 in organic samples. And therefore, the scientists would say, well, don't test for it, because there's not going to be any there. All right? And yet diamonds, the hardest natural substance on Earth, supposedly 1 to 3 billion years old, seem to all have carbon-14 in them. What does that tell you? Probably not as old as we think that they are. All right? So next week we'll explore that a little bit further. Anybody have a closing comment or question this morning? All right? Didn't quite get to tricky question. Close with this one. When the Bible talks about kinds back in Genesis 1, is the Bible talking about how they were created or how they reproduce? Or both? Maybe we'll explore that next week. Anybody have a closing comment or question? Reagan, you're a mighty fine sport to put up with. All right. No questions? All right, I'll dismiss you 30 seconds early then.